When one speaks about the affairs of nations, often we are seduced into thinking only of parliaments, of armies, of trade agreements, and of the open spectacle of diplomacy. But the truest theater of power has always been in the shadows. The story of Israel sending 12 agents into India, with 11 disappearing without a trace, is not just a news headline. It is a mirror into the underworld where sovereignty is contested in silence, where battles are waged without bullets, and where the victors are never celebrated publicly, only whispered about in corridors of power. Think about it. 12 men trained, prepared, commissioned, and dispatched with a mission only known to a handful. They cross into a land not their own, carrying with them the secrets of a state, the ambitions of a people, and the confidence of an institution that prides itself on precision. Yet out of the 12, 11 simply vanish, not killed in combat, not caught in broad daylight, not paraded as prisoners. No, they vanish into the vastness of India's soil as if the earth itself swallowed them. What does that tell us? It tells us that beyond the visible realm of politics there is another terrain where the rules are different, where disappearance is more devastating than death, and where silence itself becomes a weapon. We must remember that espionage is not a glamorous game played by fictional characters in novels. It is the front line of national survival. Intelligence officers are deployed not for glory but for sacrifice. They are trained to live in the shadows so that their nations may shine in the light. Yet, when they disappear, as these men did, the disappearance is not merely of individuals. It is the disappearance of information, of strategy, of leverage. It is as though a piece of a nation's brain has been cut off and erased. Let us not take this lightly. For in that disappearance lies a statement that no matter how powerful a state considers its intelligence apparatus, there are always forces larger, darker, and more complex than even the most seasoned operatives can withstand. Israel is often celebrated as one of the finest when it comes to intelligence. Yet here, in this instance, it suffered a blow not with the firing of a gun, but with the silence of an unanswered question. Where did they go? India becomes the silent stage for this mystery, but it is not India alone, for when agents vanish, one must ask, who else knew? Who else intervened? Was it rival powers maneuvering in the shadows? Was it betrayal within the mission itself? Was it an invisible hand ensuring that certain secrets never reached the surface? You see, disappearance is not just about absence. It is about message. Someone somewhere sent a message that even in a world governed by superpowers, no one operates with impunity. Psychologically, this episode teaches us something profound. Nations, like individuals, can fall prey to the illusion of invincibility. But the vanishing of 11 men is a brutal reminder that no system, however strong, is immune to the vulnerabilities of secrecy. It is a warning to all nations that in the dark art of intelligence, overconfidence is the first step to defeat. Those who live by shadows must also be prepared to be swallowed by them. Philosophically, the incident reminds us that the greatest battles are not fought in open plains, but in hidden alleys. The war of the 21st century is not one of bombs and bullets, but of whispers and vanishing footprints. The modern soldier does not always wear uniform. He wears anonymity. And when such a soldier vanishes, he becomes both a symbol of sacrifice and a question mark upon his nation's strength. Think also of the families of those who disappear. They live in the limbo of silence, knowing their loved ones served in missions that may never be spoken of, died deaths that may never be confirmed, and carried secrets that will never be revealed. This, too, is the hidden cost of espionage, a burden borne in silence, with no medals, no recognition, only shadows. And yet, beyond the sorrow, there lies strategy, for the vanishing of agents also reshapes the mental map of nations. It forces governments to rethink their methods, to re-examine alliances, to reinforce their borders not merely with walls and soldiers, but with intelligence and foresight. The unseen battlefield demands constant vigilance, because in that silence where 11 men vanish, entire empires can shift. So I say to you, this is not merely a mystery, it is a lesson. It is a warning that in our world power is fragile, secrets are dangerous, and silence can be louder than the explosion of bombs. Nations rise and fall not just by the strength of their economies or armies, but by their ability to operate in the unseen and to survive the consequences when the unseen turns against them. 11 men did not just vanish, they became the embodiment of a truth humanity must never forget, that the most decisive battles are not always visible, and the most powerful victories are often unrecorded. The mystery of their disappearance is a testament to the fact that in the shadows there are no guarantees, only risks. And so, my brothers and sisters, let us take this to heart. Life itself is not unlike the world of intelligence. We all move between the seen and the unseen, the known and the unknown. Our victories and our defeats are often hidden. But if there is one lesson to draw, it is this: never underestimate the silence, never ignore the shadows, and never assume that power guarantees safety. For sometimes the most dangerous battlefield is the one you cannot see. When a nation finds itself in the midst of mysteries that shake the foundations of geopolitics, the instinct is often to look outward. But sometimes the true story lies within. India today is not the India of yesterday. It is not the land merely described by its poverty or its colonial past. It is a nation ascending, a nation refusing to be underestimated, a nation announcing silently but firmly that it will no longer be a pawn in the games of others. It will be a player. And so when 11 Israeli agents vanish without a trace on Indian soil, the question is not simply about their disappearance. The deeper question is, what role did India play? Was India merely the stage, or was India the strategist orchestrating silence in a way the world did not expect? You see, India occupies a unique position in the architecture of world politics. It is courted by the West as a counterweight to China, yet it shares a long history of ties with Russia. It is bound by cultural affinities in Asia, yet increasingly pulled into the orbit of the United States. India has one foot in the corridors of the East and another in the councils of the West. This duality means that India must balance, maneuver, and outthink, for in this world survival is not given, it is earned. And when 11 men vanish on its soil, India's silence speaks volumes. For silence itself in geopolitics is a strategy. Ask yourself, was India complicit in the disappearance? Was it an act of defiance, a statement that foreign intelligence cannot trespass without consequences? Or was India caught in a web woven by others, where it became a stage for a script written in Washington, Moscow, or Beijing? To understand this, one must recognize that India is no longer content to be a passive recipient of global narratives. It is striving to be the author of its own, and authorship sometimes requires daring moves, subtle signals, and acts that may never be acknowledged openly. This is the chessboard of geopolitics. Every move is disguised, every strategy hidden beneath layers of ambiguity. When Israel sends 12 and only one returns, The obvious assumption is that India failed to notice. But perhaps India noticed too much. Perhaps India decided that sovereignty could no longer be taken for granted. In the age where drones cross skies without permission, where data is stolen in seconds, and where espionage has become the true currency of power, India may well have decided to remind the world that its soil is not a free playground for foreign adventurers. We must also recognize the psychological symbolism of this disappearance. For Israel, it may appear as humiliation. For India, it could serve as quiet empowerment, to show that even the most renowned intelligence networks are not invincible. To show that in the great game of nations, it is not always the celebrated who win, it is sometimes the underestimated. History has always favored those who understand the power of patience, discretion, and timing. India, with its civilizational memory stretching back millennia, knows the art of waiting, of watching, of striking not with noise, but with precision. And here lies the deeper philosophical truth. Every rising nation must decide whether it will remain a pawn, moved and sacrificed by stronger powers, or whether it will rewrite the rules of the game. India stands at that very crossroads. By allowing this disappearance to remain shrouded in mystery, India asserts not only control of its soil, but also control of the narrative. It forces both allies and adversaries to ask, how much does India know? How far will India go? How prepared is India to guard its sovereignty? Let us not forget that espionage is not merely about secrets. It is about leverage. It is about sending messages without speaking. And India's silence may be its loudest declaration yet. Nations that underestimate such silence do so at their peril. For silence is never neutral. It is either ignorance or it is strategy. And in this case, one suspects it is strategy. But beyond the national dimension, there is a lesson for each of us. Life, like geopolitics, constantly tests whether we will play the role of pawn or master. Do we allow others to write our script, or do we seize the pen to author our destiny? India's moment on this hidden battlefield is a metaphor for the human condition. Every individual, every community, every nation faces the choice. Will we allow ourselves to be used, or will we rise to claim agency? Think of it. 11 men vanish, and the world speculates. But in that speculation, India's stature grows. For nations realize that the days of treating India as a passive backdrop are over. It is no longer just a marketplace of goods or a hub of technology. It is a geopolitical force, demanding respect not with shouts, but with silence. When we speak of espionage, it is easy to reduce it to a contest of cunning, a spectacle of strategy, a world of codes and disguises. But beneath the glamour, beneath the secrecy, there lies something far more profound. The human cost, the moral dilemma, and the eternal lesson about power and its limits. The vanishing of 11 men on Indian soil is not just an incident to be debated in intelligence circles. It is a reminder that power, when pursued through shadows, carries consequences that cannot be ignored. Those agents who disappeared were not mere numbers in a report. They were human beings. They had families. They had dreams. They had identities. Yet they chose, or were chosen, to live lives defined by invisibility. Their fate is a chilling reminder that in the world of espionage, the individual is often reduced to an instrument, a tool deployed in service of national interest, and when the mission collapses, they vanish not only from sight but from history itself. Their sacrifices rarely honored, their story rarely told, their deaths or disappearances rarely acknowledged. In this sense, espionage represents the darkest form of patriotism, loyalty that demands invisibility, devotion that erases identity, service that is rewarded with silence. But the disappearance of 11 men is more than a tragedy. It is also a revelation. It reveals that even the most sophisticated systems of power have cracks. It tells us that human intelligence, however advanced, is always subject to human vulnerability. The most highly trained agent still has a heartbeat, still breathes, still bleeds. And in that fragility lies the paradox of power, for nations often imagine that power lies in their arsenals, in their databases, in their technologies. Yet power is ultimately carried by people, by fragile beings who can vanish without a trace. This should humble every government and remind every citizen that no system is invincible. The psychological dimension is equally significant. Espionage thrives on secrecy, but secrecy is also a prison. To live a life where your name cannot be spoken, where your victories cannot be celebrated, where your death cannot be mourned, that is the ultimate price. When these men disappeared, their nations lost more than operatives. They lost fragments of their own humanity. For what is the cost of a state that survives only by consuming the lives of its invisible children? At what point does the pursuit of power become a betrayal of the very people it seeks to protect? Philosophically, this mystery confronts us with the nature of truth itself. For in espionage, truth is always distorted, layered, hidden. The world will never know the real story of what happened to those agents. Were they captured? Were they executed? Were they absorbed into another system? Or did they defect, disillusioned by the very machinery they serve? The absence of answers is itself a form of power, and this is the paradox. Truth, when denied, becomes more powerful than truth when revealed. By leaving the world in the dark, the disappearance reshapes perceptions, instills fear, and asserts control. For uncertainty is often a more effective weapon than clarity, but let us not deceive ourselves. This is not merely a tale of spies. It is a parable of life. Each of us, in our own way, navigates between the visible and the invisible, between what is said and what is left unsaid. We all keep secrets. We all live lives partly in the light and partly in the shadow. And the lesson here is not confined to geopolitics. It is about how we confront the cost of silence in our own lives. Do we hide truths until they consume us? Do we vanish into irrelevance because we never dared to step into the light? Do we allow ourselves to be instruments of others' agendas, forgetting that our lives too are sacred and finite? The disappearance of those 11 men challenges us to ask, what legacy will we leave behind? For to vanish without a trace is not only the fate of spies. It is the fate of anyone who lives without purpose, without courage, without authenticity. To live in fear of exposure, to bury one's voice, to suppress one's truth, is to disappear long before death comes. And so their vanishing is a warning not only to nations, but to us as individuals that the greatest tragedy is not death itself, but the erasure of identity, the silence of legacy, the loss of meaning. And yet there is another layer still. For nations, the lesson is that espionage, while necessary, is never sufficient. A state that invests only in shadows, that builds only on secrecy, builds on sand. True power lies not only in controlling secrets, but in commanding legitimacy. A government that cannot inspire loyalty in the open, that must rely solely on hidden operatives, is a government that has already confessed its weakness. The disappearance of agents is therefore a moral indictment. It says to every state, if your survival depends only on what cannot be seen, then your strength is an illusion. The world of shadows is alluring. It promises control, it promises knowledge, it promises dominance. But shadows are unstable. They shift, they change, they betray. What happened in India is a reminder that nations which live by shadows must also prepare to be consumed by them. And the same is true for individuals. If your life is built on lies, on secrets, on half-truths, then you too live in shadows, and one day the shadows will turn against you.